When I walked into my parents' will reading, I was already bracing for disappointment. Our relationship had been tense for years, but I still hoped for at least a token of love, a photograph, a letter, something. Instead, the lawyer read out a cold line that stripped me of everything. My siblings gloated quietly, and the lawyer smirked as if he'd been waiting for this moment, but he didn't know I had come prepared. Inside my folder was a document that would turn the room silent, shake my family's version of history, and make that smirk disappear. What began as a humiliating day would unravel into a battle over truth, betrayal, and the kind of inheritance no one saw coming. The mahogany table in the lawyer's office smelled faintly of polish and dust, like old secrets that had been carefully stored away. I sat between my older brother, David, and my younger sister, Clara. Neither looked at me. Their bodies leaned subtly toward each other, forming an unspoken alliance. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and silent judgment. Mr. Blake, our family's attorney for as long as I can remember, adjusted his glasses and gave me a glance that felt like a pat on the head of a misbehaving child. "Shall we begin?" he asked, though it wasn't a question. He read in that practiced, monotone voice lawyers use when they don't want you to notice the knife sliding in. "To my son David and my daughter Clara, I leave the family home, all financial assets and personal possessions." My heartbeat slowed, almost curious to see where I fit into this story. "To my daughter, Emily," he paused. My breath caught. "I leave nothing." The silence that followed was louder than the words themselves. Clara's lips twitched into the tiniest smirk. David shifted in his seat, pretending to check his watch. Mr. Blake didn't even bother to hide the curve of his mouth, a faint, almost pitying smile. I could feel my skin flushing hot. Nothing. Not even a photograph. Not a book from my childhood. Not my mother's silver locket she promised would be mine. Just erased. I forced my lips into a neutral line. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice steady. "That's all," Mr. Blake replied, stacking the papers as if the matter was settled, as if my parents' decision was final and fair, but I hadn't come unprepared. From my bag, I pulled a slim black folder and placed it on the table with a soft thud. "Then I suppose," I said slowly, looking directly at Mr. Blake, "it's time we discussed this." David frowned. "What is that?" "Something you all seem to have forgotten," I replied. I slid the first page out just enough for them to see the header, my father's signature, the family trust seal, and a date from 22 years ago. Clara leaned forward. "Where did you get that?" "My father gave it to me," I said. "On the night everything changed." Mr. Blake's smirk faltered. His hand froze mid-motion over the stack of documents. "Emily, you need to understand." "No," I cut him off. "You need to understand. I've been silent for years. I've watched the two of you," I looked at David and Clara, "rewrite our family history like I wasn't even part of it. But the truth? The truth has teeth." The room seemed to shrink. Mr. Blake shifted in his chair, the confidence draining from his posture. "Emily, this is complicated." I tapped the folder lightly. "Not complicated. Just inconvenient. For you." Outside, a car door slammed. Through the window, I saw a shadow approaching, a figure I hadn't expected to see again. My breath hitched, my grip tightening on the folder, and then the office door opened. The door swung open with a slow, deliberate creak, and the man who stepped inside seemed to bring the cold with him. His coat was black, damp from the rain, and his eyes scanned the room with the calm precision of someone who already knew exactly where everyone was sitting. I recognized him instantly, even after all these years. Mark Whitaker. My father's former business partner. The man who vanished from our lives without explanation when I was 14. My siblings looked as startled as I felt, though they tried to hide it. "Emily," he said, nodding once in acknowledgement, as if greeting me first was a deliberate choice. His voice hadn't changed, low, steady, like someone who never rushed To say more than he needed, Mr. Whitaker, Mr. Blake said quickly, his tone sharp, almost defensive. You weren't invited to this meeting. No, Mark replied, walking past him without pause, but I was summoned. He glanced at the folder in front of me, and the faintest smile touched his lips. I see you found it. David looked. Between us, suspicion tightening his jaw. Found what? What's going on? I didn't answer him. My eyes stayed on Mark. You knew about this all along, didn't you? I did, he said simply. Your father trusted me with the original. In case certain people tried to bury it. His gaze flicked to Mr. Blake, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Clara crossed her arms. This is absurd. Dad cut her out of the will. That's the end of it. Is it? Mark said softly, producing his own envelope from inside his coat. The paper was creased and worn, the kind of document that had traveled hidden for years. He placed it on the table beside my folder. Because your father's signature is on this too. And it changes everything. I glanced at Mr. Blake, whose expression had gone pale. What exactly is it? I asked, though part of me already feared the answer. Mark leaned closer to me, lowering his voice just enough that my siblings had to strain to hear. It's proof that your father set aside a portion of the estate for you, separate from the will. He did it quietly, because he didn't trust the people handling his affairs after his health began to fail. David scoffed. That makes no sense. Why wouldn't he just put it in the will? Because, Mark said, his tone suddenly sharp, he knew the will would be handled by a man who owed loyalty to someone else. His eyes locked on Mr. Blake. My pulse thudded in my ears. You're saying the will was tampered with? Mark didn't answer directly. I'm saying your father wasn't as blind as you all assumed. He tapped the envelope. But this document will mean nothing unless you're prepared to fight for it. Something in his voice chilled me, not because of the warning, but because it carried a weight of unfinished business. What's in it for you? Clara asked, her voice laced with disdain. Mark smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Justice. And maybe a bit of revenge. The rain outside intensified, rattling the windows. The air in the room thickened, every pair of eyes locked on the two envelopes lying side by side on the polished wood, and then Mark said something that made my stomach drop. Before your mother died, he said, she told me the truth about what happened the night you were sent away. I froze. I hadn't heard anyone speak about that night in over a decade. My siblings avoided my gaze, but their sudden stillness was enough to confirm what I'd always suspected. They knew more than they'd ever admitted. What truth? I whispered. Mark's eyes softened, almost regretful. It's in here, he said, resting his hand on the envelope. But once you read it, there's no going back. The clock on the wall ticked once, loudly, and then Mark slid the envelope toward me, slid my finger beneath the brittle flap and felt the edge of paper catch against my skin. It wasn't just a document, it was a weight, a pulse, a door I'd been circling for half my life. I glanced at Mark. He gave the smallest nod, as if to say, whatever happens next, you asked for it. Mr. Blake adjusted his tie, trying to look indifferent. David's knee bounced, restless. Clara's nails clicked against the arm of her chair. Inside, on top, lay a letter in my mother's handwriting. I would have recognized those looping, careful lines anywhere. The smell of her perfume rose from the page like a ghost. My throat tightened, and for a second the room softened, not the battlefield it had become but a place where my mother hummed in the kitchen and pretended the world was safe. I forced my eyes to the date, 8 months before she died. My dear Emily, it began. If you're reading this, it means the plan I feared has come to pass. Your father trusted the wrong man, and I stood by too long. I never wanted you to carry our secrets, but silence has a way of turning truth into poison. If the will leaves you nothing, do not believe it reflects your father's heart. It reflects his fear. My hands trembled and the page shook with them. Clara rolled her eyes. So dramatic, she muttered. Shut up, David said, surprising me. I read on. The night you were sent away was not your fault. You found your father's ledger, the one with the shell companies. You asked questions. Someone heard you. By morning, there was a story about your behavior, your instability, the medication I supposedly found. I lied, because if I didn't, you would have been the one destroyed. I looked up, every nerve in my body blazing. Medication? I whispered. You told everyone I had breakdowns. Mr. Blake cleared his throat as if an excuse might fall out. Your mother consulted me. She thought you would protect the family, Mark cut in. But protection was never your business, was it? I returned to the letter. If you want what is yours, go to box 317 at New Harbor Trust. The key is hidden where? You used to keep that blue diary you never let me read. Only you know that place. Inside the box is proof of the trust your father established. You were always the contingency, the one who saw through the smiling. And Emily, do not go alone. There is one person you must not trust. The letter ended there. No signature, just a pressed flower petal embedded in the crease, fragile and brown. I could hear Clara's breath hitch, the faintest sound. She remembered the blue diary. She'd tried to pick the lock when we were kids. Box 317, I said, barely audible. She hid the key. Where? David demanded. In a place none of you would think to look, I answered, because even now some small, protective part of me held on to the only corner of childhood that was mine. Mark unfolded a second sheet. It wasn't a letter, but a copy of a notarized agreement, my father's signature, the trust seal, a schedule of assets diverted from the main estate. The notary stamp blinked like an accusation. The date was 3 years ago, long after the first trust document in my folder. It named me as a beneficiary of a separate account to be administered only upon presentation of the documents in box 317, slid the page toward Mr. Blake. Explain why I was left out of the will if this existed. He stared at the stamp too long. Your father made changes. He doubted the viability of the trust. He doubted you, Mark said. He called me the night he signed that. He said, if I don't make it, give Emily the map. Clara laughed without humor. So, this is a scavenger hunt? All we're missing is a riddle under the doormat. I ignored her. Something was off, a thin thread pulling at the edge of the narrative. Mom wrote that there was someone I shouldn't trust. Who? Probably me, in their version, Mr. Blake said, trying a smile that didn't reach his eyes. My phone buzzed on the table, a private number flashing. I shouldn't have picked up, but curiosity, that old inheritance, won. A single message appeared, a photo of the conference room from outside the window, taken moments ago. 4 figures, trapped in a rectangle of glass, my hand hovering over my mother's letter. The caption read, "Too late." My heart slammed. I stood so fast my chair scraped. We need to go now. Mark's face hardened. The bank closes in 30 minutes. He looked at the clock. Traffic will trap us on 5th. We're not driving, I said, and I surprised myself with the certainty in my voice. There's a walkway behind the courthouse that cuts to Harbor Street. We can be there in 15. David moved to block me. You're not taking anything without us. You didn't want me to have anything a minute ago, I shot back. Decide. He stepped aside, but his expression curdled into something calculating. Clara grabbed her coat. Mr. Blake lingered, then scooped the notarized copy into his folder with a speed that made Mark's hand snap to his wrist. That stays with her, Mark said. It's a copy, Mr. Blake said. I'm keeping it secure. Like you kept my father's will secure? I asked. He released it. He moved as a unit down the hallway, for people bound by blood and paper cuts, the sound of rain muffled by carpet and expensive art. In the elevator, the lights hummed. I stared at our reflections in the mirrored steel. Mark steady, David rigid, Clara brittle, me with my mother's letter clutched to my chest like a shield. I in the lobby. The security guard glanced up with interest that lingered a second too long. Outside, the rain had washed the city into a smear of headlights and wet glass. We cut through the alley beside the courthouse, our footsteps echoing. I could feel someone behind us, or maybe it was only my fear catching up. Who sent that photo? David asked. Someone close, I said. Close enough to know we'd open the envelope here. Blake, Clara hissed. Maybe, Mark said. Or maybe the person your mother warned about. We reached Harbor Street with 17 minutes to spare. New Harbor Trust glowed a sterile white through the rain. Behind the glass doors, a receptionist looked up, practiced smile in place, a hand already hovering near the button that locks the entrance after hours, stepped inside, shaking water onto the marble. Box 317, I said, breathless. I'm Emily Hart. I need immediate access. The receptionist blinked, then glanced to her left. A man in a dark suit emerged from a side office, his badge catching the light. He looked at me as if I were late to my own trap. Ms. Hart, he said smoothly. We've been expecting you. My fingers tightened around the letter. Expecting me how? He smiled with impeccable politeness. Your appointment was confirmed this morning. He gestured to the vault corridor. If you'll follow me, we can retrieve your box. But first, he held out his hand. I'll need to see your key. The blood drained from my face. I hadn't recovered the key yet. It was still where my mother said I'd hidden it years ago. My secret place. The man's smile widened by a millimeter, triumph disguised as courtesy. Don't worry, he added. Your representative arrived ahead of you and provided access. He stepped aside from the vault corridor. Someone walked out carrying a small metal box stamped 317. My breath caught in my lungs and refused to move. The figure lifted their eyes to mine, unapologetic, rain still jeweled in their hair. It wasn't Mr. Blake. It wasn't David or Clara. It was the one person my mother had told me not to trust. And when they opened the box, my mother's voice began to play. Her voice floated through the bank lobby, warm yet edged with something I had never heard from her before, urgency. If you are hearing this, she said, it means the person holding this box is not Emily. Every muscle in my body went rigid. The man carrying the box didn't flinch. He was tall, sharply dressed, and far too calm for someone caught in a theft. I knew his face, Daniel Cross. My mother's cousin. The charming, slippery man who had been around during our childhood like a favorite uncle until he vanished after my father's stroke. He stepped forward, placing the box gently on the counter as if this were all part of some polite transaction. Mark moved toward him, but the suited bank employee raised a hand. Security is already on their way, he said. Let's avoid unnecessary drama. Drama? I said, my voice cutting through the sterile air. That's my property. Daniel smiled like a man humoring a child. It was your property. Now it's under review. He tapped the lid. This contains more than just financial documents, Emily. It contains explanations your parents couldn't give you while they were alive. And some of those explanations aren't in your favor. I felt David shift beside me, like the idea of something damaging to me was both delicious and dangerous. Clara's gaze darted between us all, her lips pressed so tightly. Together they were colorless. The recording continued. Emily, you must take what's inside directly to the person named in the sealed envelope. Do not trust anyone else, not family, not old friends, and especially not Daniel Cross. Mark smirked at Daniel, and for a moment I saw something lethal in his eyes. Looks like you didn't make the cut, cousin. Daniel's smile didn't falter. Your mother had her reasons. Some were wrong. She was protecting herself as much as you. And she knew what I know, your father's fortune didn't come from where you think. That stopped me cold. What are you talking about? He leaned in slightly. You think you're fighting for your inheritance. You're really fighting to keep something hidden. If you open that envelope without me, you'll burn everything your father built, and not just for you. The bank manager arrived, flanked by 2 security guards. Is there a problem here? She asked. Yes, I said, stepping forward. That's my safe deposit box. Number 317. My name is Emily Hart. Daniel's voice was calm, persuasive. And I'm the co-trustee, named here in the documents. He held up a piece of paper with an official seal. My stomach sank. I didn't know if it was real, but the bank manager studied it with the weight of someone who did. Mark swore under his breath. That wasn't in the original trust. Modifications, Daniel said smoothly. Done legally, years ago. The bank manager looked at me. Without proof to the contrary, I have to honor both parties' rights. She turned to Daniel. Shall we proceed in the conference room? No, I said sharply. We open it here. Now. In front of all of us. Daniel tilted his head. Impatient as ever. Fine. He slid the key into the lock and turned it. The lid lifted with a soft metallic sigh. Inside was a stack of envelopes bound with a ribbon, a small black notebook, and an old cassette tape. My name was written across the ribbon in my mother's handwriting. I reached for it, but Daniel's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with just enough pressure to make the point. You open that without hearing what I have to say, and you'll regret it. The bank manager's eyes narrowed. Mr. Cross, release her. He did, but slowly, as if letting me go was his decision, not hers. I lifted the ribboned bundle from the box. The notebook was leather, worn, the edges darkened with age. I opened it to the first page, and my father's handwriting hit me. Like a blow, dates, numbers, company names, and at the bottom, a single word in bold ink, witnesses. Mark peered over my shoulder. That's the ledger your mother mentioned. Daniel closed the box. Careful, Emily. You're stepping into something bigger than a family feud. I clutched the notebook, the cassette, and the envelopes to my chest. Maybe that's exactly what I want. The bank manager cleared her throat. We'll need to document what's leaving the vault. Do it, I said, turning toward the door. I could feel Daniel's gaze on my back like a shadow stitched to me. As we stepped into the rain, Mark leaned close. Where are we going? Somewhere safe, I said. But in my gut, I knew safety was already behind us, locked in a past that had never really belonged to me. We were halfway to the courthouse walkway when I heard the echo of footsteps matching ours, not hurried, not slow, just steady. I glanced back. Through the curtain of rain, Daniel followed, hands in his pockets, smiling like he'd already won, and then my phone buzzed again. Another message from the same private number. This time, it was a voice recording. I pressed play, and my own mother's voice whispered, Emily, you have less time than you think. Her voice wasn't part of the bank tape. It was a separate recording, raw, urgent, like she had been speaking in a room where someone might burst in at any moment. Emily, listen to me. You can't trust the timeline they're giving you. By the time you hear this, someone will already be moving against you. You have one day, maybe less, to get the ledger to the person named in the sealed envelope. If you fail, they'll take it, and with it, everything your father wanted you to protect. The recording cut off with a sharp click, as though she had been interrupted. The rain clung to my skin like ice, but my chest burned. Mark glanced at me. What did she say? That we're already too late, I said. Daniel was still behind us, 20 steps back, that infuriating calm on his face. David noticed him too and slowed his pace. Maybe we should hear him out, he muttered. I spun on him. You don't hear out the man Mom told me not to trust. She told you not To trust anyone, Clara snapped. Which means she didn't trust you either. Maybe you're not telling us everything. The words landed harder than they should have. Not because they were true, but because some part of me knew my mother hadn't told me everything either. She'd left me a trail, but every clue seemed to pull me towards something bigger and darker than just an inheritance fight. He cut across the courthouse walkway, rain pooling in the cracks, my shoes slipping on the wet stone. The sealed envelope was still in my coat pocket, heavy as if it knew its contents could change the rest of my life. The temptation to rip it open was unbearable, but her warning echoed in my head: do not trust anyone else, not family, not old friends, and especially not Daniel Cross. If I opened it here, in the open, I might as well have handed it to him. Mark was watching me carefully. You're thinking about opening it? I'm thinking about how fast we can get to this person she trusted. He gave a grim nod. Then we move now. But we do it smart. If Daniel's following, he's not working alone. We reached the street just as a black sedan pulled to the curb. A man in a dark raincoat stepped out and opened the back door without a word. His eyes locked on me. Emily Hart, he asked. Mark stepped between us. Who's asking? Someone who can take her to the contact. Your mother arranged it before she died. Daniel's voice came from behind. And you believe that? You're more naive than I thought, Emily. The man didn't flinch. You've got 10 seconds to decide before this street gets a lot less safe. The city seemed to hold its breath. David's jaw tightened. Clara looked like she might bolt in either direction. Mark kept his body slightly angled toward the man, his hand inside his coat where I suspected a weapon might be. In my mind, I heard my mother's voice again: less time than you think. My gut screamed that standing here meant losing whatever chance I had left. I slid into the back seat of the sedan. Mark followed without hesitation. David and Clara exchanged a look, then climbed in. Daniel didn't move, but he didn't leave either. He just watched, his hands deep in his coat pockets, as the door shut and the car pulled away into the wet blur of city lights. Inside, the driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. You have the envelope? Yes. Good. Don't open it until I tell you. And whatever you do, don't look behind you. Which, of course, is exactly what I did. Through the rain-streaked glass, far down the road, the headlights of another car were locked on us. The same black sedan Daniel had arrived in. I didn't know if my mother's contact was real. I didn't know if the man driving was leading me into safety or a trap. But I knew one thing with bone-deep certainty: the moment that envelope left my hands, the truth about my family would be gone forever. So I gripped it tighter, ignored the pounding of my heart, and prepared for whatever waited at the end of the road, because I was done being the daughter they erased, and if they thought they'd buried the truth with my parents, they were about to learn I was the one holding the shovel.